This is also a way to avoid getting catfished. If they squirm, if they're not clear, if they're fidgety. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new around here, welcome. And I am Adunola, Adeshola. I teach high achievers how to land new jobs they love at companies they love. My clients have landed job offers at a few places you might be familiar with, and my career advice has been featured at some companies that you might have heard of. Sometimes you can get so caught up with wanting to say the perfect thing in an interview that you forget to ask smart questions that, one, impress hiring managers, and two, help you discover if the role is right for you. In today's video, we're gonna talk about how many questions you should ask in an interview, what questions you should never ask in an interview, when to ask questions, and what questions you should always ask in every single interview. So first things up, how many questions should you ask in an interview? Depending on the flow of the conversation, I recommend asking at least 2 to 3 questions in the interview. But I do recommend preparing at least 5 questions in case one of the 2 questions that you want to ask gets answered throughout the conversation. Next, when should you ask questions? So the traditional way to ask questions is to wait at the end of the interview. So you go through all their questions, and then at the end, they're like, do you have any questions for me? And you're like, yes, I do. That is totally fine. But a much better approach is to ask questions throughout the interview. This allows the interview to flow more like a conversation, and it gives you a chance to ask more questions organically without feeling like you're bombarding them with many questions at the end of the interview. So that could look like them asking you, why do you want to work here? And then you answer that question beautifully. And by the way, I have a video on how to answer that question if you need it. And then after you answer that question, you could circle back with a question of your own. But of course, sometimes interviewers can be super stoic and not personable. And so it really just depends on how you feel in the conversation. If it feels better to just wait to the end to ask your questions, do it. But if you feel comfortable being able to make it a conversation, do that as well. Fill the interviewer out and just see what works best for each person. As far as how to ask questions, I always recommend personalizing each question and tailoring them to either your research or to the previous conversations you've had if you are at the further stages of the interview process. So this could look like adding something to your question like, I already saw in my research that XYZ, but I would love to hear your perspective on XYZ. Or it could look like saying something like, Marvin mentioned in our last interview that XYZ, but I would love to hear your perspective on ABC. This is an excellent way to show that you're paying attention and that you're truly invested in what you're asking about. Now, when it comes to what type of questions you should ask, I like to categorize it by your place in the interview process. When it comes to the first round of interviews, it's typically with a recruiter who has a good understanding of the role, but they might not understand the nuances of the team or the challenges that the hiring manager is experiencing, but their main goal is to make sure that you actually can do the job so that they know that they can push you to the next step. So while most questions are fair game, if you know that their main goal is to make sure that you are a good enough candidate to move to the next level, that you can do the role at a high level, then you want to make sure that you understand the role that you are getting into. And there are 2 benefits to why this is important. One, if you are able to ask really good questions about the role, you can then use these responses to help you continue to stand out as you move further along in the interview process. Number 2, it's a really great opportunity to make sure that the role that you applied for is the role that you're going to be pursuing. It's the role that they're actually hiring for, and that it's a role that you actually want and can do. So some of the questions you could ask in a first round interview is, how would you describe this role in your own words? And because you always want to make your questions personal, you could add something like, I've read from the job description that this role really focuses on XYZ, but how would you describe this role in your own words? Another question you can ask is, what inspired this role? Is this a new role, or did someone recently leave this position? This question is important because it'll give you insight into whether you are going to be helping shape this role because it's a new position, or if you're going to be filling a role that someone was recently in. And if you're filling a role that someone previously left, then it can help you determine if that person is not going to be your manager, or if people are leaving the company too fast and they need to bring some new people in. It'll just give you some insight into what is going on. Another question could be, what would a typical day look like for me in this role? They might not be able to answer this question in depth, if the recruiter isn't closely connected to this position, but it's still a good question that you can get some insight from if they do happen to be closely connected to this role or the team. Another fun question that you could ask in this first round of interviews is, how would you describe the company in 3 words? This is a fun question to ask because it puts them on their toes and it shows that you are interested in the company culture. You can even respond to their answer by saying your own 3 words that come to mind from your research and let them know if it lines up with what they shared. For the interviews after the first round of interviews, they are really about making sure that you align with both the role and the culture. They want to make sure that you can do the job and that you will be a good addition to the team. So this is your opportunity to ask them any of the questions we've already discussed on top of any other new questions that allow you to dive deeper into the role and the culture. So a question that you could add to your list is, ideally, if I was to be offered this role, what are some of the biggest priorities that you would like me to tackle in the first 90 days? This is a sneaky nice question to ask because it allows them to visualize you in the role and allows them to start to picture what you can accomplish if you were in the position. And it allows you to get more insight in what it will look like once you are in the role, and it will allow you to determine if those things that they say are things that you actually want to be doing for the next 90 days. Another question you could ask is, what qualities are you all looking for in a new hire that will make fitting in with the team a no-brainer? And of course, you always want to personalize your question, so I would recommend prefacing this question with telling them what you've already learned about the company culture. So you could say something like, I noticed that you all are really big on collaboration and failing fast, but what other qualities are you all looking for in a new hire? This shows them that you've already done your research and that you would just like to get their perspective, which will give you more insight into if they really walk the walk, talk the talk, and if there are other things that they're really looking for in this new hire that maybe you overlooked or they didn't share previous to that conversation. On top of that, this will give you more insider details that you can use in your next interviews with the company to show them that you are the perfect new hire that they are looking for. This next question is a fan favorite, and every time my clients ask this question, they get raving responses. I recommend asking this question whenever you're connecting with someone in an interview that you would be reporting to or someone that you will be working closely with on the team. And so the question is, in what ways do you see this role alleviating your current challenges or taking things off your plate? This question is such a good question because you have to remember that companies want to hire problem solvers, and by directly asking them how you can solve their problems, alleviate their challenges, you are showing them that you are the problem solver that they need for the role. I recommend asking this question regardless of your seniority level, because even if you're going after a director or an executive position, this will help you see if this role is actually going to allow you to do the work that you want to do. Are you going to be doing work that just seems minute and not really important, or are you actually going to be able to be a part of the big picture, the strategy and the planning that you really want to do, for example, in that position? Another question you can ask is, what are the biggest issues or challenges you'd expect for me to encounter in my first few months in the role? This is similar to the other question that I shared earlier, but it's kind of a flip where it's talking about what are the actual obstacles or setbacks that may be presented if you were in the position. It's also a good question to ask because when they share with you the challenges that you might encounter, you can counter that by telling them exactly how you'll overcome them, or reassure them that those challenges, in fact, won't be challenges at all because maybe you've experienced something similar in your previous role. It will drive home that you are who they need, and it will help eliminate speculation that might not have been able to be addressed if you didn't ask that question. Now, there are questions that I always recommend asking in interviews, and I'm going to share with you what those are at the end. But what about the questions you should never ask? For one, unless they ask about compensation, I recommend holding off on those questions until you get further along in the interview process. The idea here is that you want to properly position yourself as a valuable asset first, so that when money is discussed, you will have more negotiating power to get a more competitive salary. But hold on, this does not mean that you should not be concerned with getting your coins and making sure that the role is paying what it should be paying. I share some practical tips to help make sure that you are negotiating the higher salary that you deserve, and so if you want some tips and tricks, you're gonna watch that video right here. Other questions questions you should not ask are leading questions. Leading questions are typically yes or no questions that also hint at what you're looking for. If your goal is to end up in a new job that you actually love, then you want to avoid asking these questions because they can lead the hiring manager to tell you what you want to hear instead of giving you the real tea on what's really going on. So instead of asking a question like, is the leadership team really committed to diversity and inclusion, where they can just be like, yes, you want to ask instead something like, could you share some examples of the diversity and inclusion initiatives that you all have recently implemented? This will give you the real scoop so that you can take what they share and use that to determine if that is in alignment with what you're looking for. This is also a way to avoid getting catfished. If they squirm, if they're not clear, if they're fidgety, if they're like, oh, great question, but they don't really have a response, then that tells you that something ain't right. Okay, something is not right. Now, what questions should you always ask at the end of every interview? I recommend always asking about the next steps in the hiring process. So at the end of the interview, you want to build that question into the other two questions that you might ask. Or if you go about the conversation approach, you can always just wait to the end to ask that last question. This is a great question to ask because it will let you know what's ahead and it will give you an opportunity to follow up at the timeline that they gave you. Another question that's good to ask at the end of every interview is there anything that concerns you about my background being a fit for this role? I'm not gonna lie to you, this is a ballsy question to ask. It puts them on the spot and it kind of puts you on the spot too. But it's a great question to address any elephant in the room that they may not have thought to ask about or that you maybe didn't get a chance to clarify. And so it helps them leave the interview feeling like their conscience is clear, and it gives you an opportunity to remind them that you are a great fit for the position. For more tips and tricks on how to land a new job that you will love, how to get more interviews, I would recommend checking out my free class on how to do just that. You can head to the link in my description box to get all of the gems on what you need to be doing to take your job search and your career to the next level. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe so that you do not miss out on any other advice on how to stand out and get hired. And if you love these questions and plan to use them in your next interview, I have one small ask. I would love for you to come back to this video and drop in the comments how your interviews went after utilizing any one of these questions so that we can see what's working for you and how it's making a difference in your job search. All right, that's all for now, and I will see you in my next video.